Now, if you've been watching YouTube for any time at all, then you've most certainly been told to
smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm.
But no matter how many times you click it or how hard you click it, all it does is turn blue. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to create a like button using SVG and CSS, which you can actually smash and destroy. Let's get started now. But before we get started, I want to give you an entire year of hosting for free by using today's video sponsor, Atlantic.net. And that's right, Atlantic.net hosting is giving you an entire year of hosting for free. And if you use the code Kyle when you sign up, you get an additional $50 of credit, which you can use on top of the free year of hosting. And this isn't some weak little server. They're actually giving you an incredibly powerful server. It's more powerful than the server that my own site runs on, and it's all for free for an entire year. So I highly recommend you check out Atlantic.net hosting and use the code Kyle when you sign up. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. So if that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this. On the right-hand side here, I have the finished version of our product so we can see what we're trying to emulate before we actually build it. We just have a simple like button, and as you click it more and more, you can see it'll start to get cracked. It'll kind of grow when you click on it to really emphasize you're clicking on it. And once you click it enough times, it's going to break apart into a bunch of little pieces. And we're able to do all of this with just SVG, CSS, and a very little bit of JavaScript just to add in the explosion. So in order to get this fancy looking like button, we use Figma to create it. So here I just have the finished version of our like button. And as you can see, it's broken in to all of these different pieces. So we can actually individually modify all of these different groups as we want. Let me just undo this back to how it was. And in order to get this into our project, if we just click on this, right click, we can copy and paste this as an SVG. And I'll put a link to this SVG for you so you can actually download this and do this along with me. So just check down in the comments for a link to the SVG. And then if we come in here and open up index.html, just get the boilerplate HTML inside of our body, we can actually paste this SVG. And as you can see, this is just a bunch of different text. Essentially, it just looks a lot like HTML, and it's SVG. It just defines the shape. So if we actually open this up with live server, make sure that everything's saved, you can see we get this exact same design as we had over here, but now it's inside of our HTML over here. And we can actually play around with this and actually move it around and modify our SVG using CSS. But in order to do that, we first need to figure out what all of these different paths correspond with, because reading this, I have no idea what M258337 is. So in order to do that easily, if we just come in here and inspect our element, and I just drag this over so that we can easily see what we're working with here, and we just hover over a different part of our SVG, for example, this first path, you can see that this first path in our SVG corresponds to this black rectangle on the left. As you can see, it's highlighted in blue. So we know that this first path right here is going to be our very first section, our very first group. And to create a group in SVG, you just use this G like this, and then everything inside of this SVG, we can actually correspond by selecting this single group. So if we move this group, it moves everything inside of it. So we can just give this a class here, which is going to be, for example, group cuff. And for this simple example, since there's only one thing in the group, we don't have to group this, but I'm going to group all of the rest of our sections because there's multiple paths in them. So for consistency, we'll also group this one. Now let's see where the rest of our sections are. We'll hover over this very next path, which you can see is this bottom right outline, as we can see here. And the very next path after that is the crack to the left, and then the crack to the top, and then this crack here. So we know that everything up to this next big path section is all going to be our bottom right hand group. So all of this code here is all going to be in one group. So let's create our group, and we'll just move that down like that. So now we have this section, which is our bottom right, inside of another group. And we'll give this a class of group bottom right, just like that. And now we can create another group based on our next section. So let's open our SVG up. This next path you see is our top right. Path after that is one of the cracks for it. And then this next small path is another crack for it. So again, these next three paths are all going to be in our class here, which is group top right. Close that off. And we'll just put this closing tag for our group down here. And now let's go back to our SVG. So now we have our 3 groups here. Let's see what this next section is. We can see it looks like it's our top. We also have this crack for that top section, and that's the only crack for the top section. So just these next 2 paths are going to be our top section. So we'll put it in a G here with a class of group top, close that off, and we'll just move this down here. There we go. Now we have just this final path section left, which is going to be this left side crack over here. We know that this is all that's left, so we can just assume this is going to be our left side. So we're again going to wrap this inside of a group, move this around, put the G at the bottom there, and we want this here to be a class which is going to be group, and this will just be our left group. And now in order to actually see how this is working and understand how everything's going, let's add in a style sheet and start applying styles to these different groups to really see what we're working with. So we can just come in here, we want to add a link for a style sheet, we'll just call it styles.css, and let's actually create that, styles.css, and inside of here we can select our different groups. So we have our group top, and we also have a group which is going to be our top right, another group which is going to be for the cuff, and another group which is going to be the bottom right. And then lastly, we're going to have our group which is on the left. So in order to understand how this works, let's just come in here and add a display of none to our different groups. You can see that's made our top group disappear. If we apply this to our top right, you can see our top right group has disappeared. If we do it to our cuff disappears. Same thing with bottom right. Save that, our bottom right disappears, and we do it again lastly with our group on the left, and our left group disappears. So by using these different classes, we can target each individual group, so that way when the thing explodes, we can move each group independently from each other, which is exactly what we want. Obviously for now we don't want to hide them, so let's just get rid of that code. And the thing that I want to work on first is going to be centering our like button in the middle of the screen. That's actually pretty easy to do. If we select the body, we can use a display here of flex. We can justify our content in the center, align our items in the center, and then all we need to do is set a min height on our body of 100 view height. If we save, you can see that centered it, but we have this scroll bar. We can just remove the margin on our body, and now you can see we'd have no more scroll bars, and our like button is dead center in our screen. Next, let's actually select our like button. We'll use a class of like button to do that. So in order to actually select our like button, which is this whole SVG, we just want to add a class which is going to be like button onto our SVG. And now we can actually select that here. And the first thing I want to do is change our cursor to be the pointer cursor. So when we hover, we get that click looking cursor. That way we know we can click this like button. And I also want to change one thing, which is overflow. I want to change this to be shown. So we're just going to say visible. And the reason for this is by default, an SVG has a certain size. If we just inspect this again, it should be pretty easy for me to demonstrate this. And if I just use this little selector tool, you can see that we have a specific rectangle around our SVG. And when we explode our SVG components, all of the different top, right, left, bottom groups, they're going to leave this SVG rectangle, this blue rectangle. And we want to make them shown because by default, anything outside of this rectangle is going to be hidden. So in order to make it show, we need to use that overflow, which we specified here, of visible. Lastly, if you remember right when we clicked on the button, we wanted it to quickly grow and then shrink. So in order to do that animation, we're going to put a transform on our like button, which has a transition. And this transition is going to be for 50 milliseconds, and we'll just do ease in and out. And we only want to transform or transition the transform property. So essentially, whenever we change transform, it's going to have a 50 millisecond transition between the two different states, which is going to give us a really quick animation, which is going to look pretty good. And in order to make our button grow to a size and then shrink back down, we want to select our like button, and we want to do this whenever we apply the class of big. We want to then change our transform, and we want to change the scale. And we're just going to scale it to about 20% larger, so we'll use 1.2. And now, if we ever apply the class of big to this like button, you can see it's going to grow to that big size, and when we remove it, it's going to shrink back down to a normal size. And in order to dictate this size of big versus small, we're actually going to use JavaScript to do that. So let's link in here a JavaScript tag. We're just going to use script.js and make sure that we defer this so it'll load after our SVG content. And then let's create that script file, script.js. And inside of here, let's just create a variable, which is going to be for our like button. And we're going to select this like button by using document.querySelector. And we just want to select for the class of like button, just like that. And then we can actually set up an event listener. So we'll say add event listener. So whenever we click on this like button, we want to run this function in here. And in this function, we're just going to add the class of big. So we'll say like button dot class list dot add, and we'll put in here the string of big. So now when we click on this button, you can see it animated to a larger size, which is that big size. But you can see it staying this big size. We want it to kind of pulse big and then shrink back down. So in order to do that, we can actually use another event listener. So we'll just do another add event listener to our button. And there's a property here called transitionend. Just one word, no capitals, all lowercase. And what this is going to do is this is going to fire whenever an animation on our object is done being performed. So we have that transition in our style sheet of 50 milliseconds. So this is going to fire essentially 50 milliseconds after we click the button. And in here, what we can do is we can take our like button, our class list, and we just want to remove the big class. And this is going to do is it's going to make it animate down to a smaller size. Now, if I click on this, you can see it grows up, and then 50 milliseconds later, it shrinks back down to that size that it was before. And I can do this as many times as I want, and you can see no matter how fast or slow I click, it's always going to work. Now, if you remember when I showed you the final version of this, it started out with no cracks, and as we clicked it, we added more and more cracks. So what we need to do inside of our index.html, we need to find each one of our cracks, which are these smaller looking paths, and we're just going to add a class here of crack to denote that these are the cracks inside of our SVG. So for each one of these small paths, let's just make sure we add that class of crack. I'm just going to scroll down to every single one of these. There we go. Now we have this class of crack on every single one of those smaller sections of our SVG. And in order to make sure that these don't show up inside of our style sheet, let's just select crack, and we'll just change the display here to none. And if I save, you can see all of the cracks have been removed from our like button. And in order to slowly add those cracks back in, we can actually track the number of clicks inside of our JavaScript. So let's create a variable called number of clicks. We're just going to default this to 0. And then inside of here, we're going to increment this by 1. So we'll just say number of clicks plus plus. This will add 1 to our number of clicks. Then what we can do is we can actually do some if statements here. For example, we're going to increment every 3 clicks. So at the very last section, when we have 12 or more clicks, what we're going to do is want to explode our element. So you can say if the number of clicks is greater than or equal to 12, inside of here is where we're going to do the explosion of our element. Else, we can do another else if here. Else if the number of clicks is greater than or equal to 9. This is going to be our next incrementing where we're going to add some more cracks in. We'll do another else if for the number of clicks greater than or equal to 6. And then lastly, we're going to have a final else if. This is going to be for number of clicks greater than or equal to 3. So essentially every 3 times that we click this like button, we're going to get more cracks all the way up until this last one where we're going to make the actual thing explode. And in order to add the cracks in, we're going to want to add them in per individual group that we have here, each one of these G tags. So in order to do that, we're going to want to pull in those different groups to our JavaScript. And instead of making you watch me type all this out, I've just copied this code over. It's pretty simple. We just have each one of our groups we named, and then we selected them by the class that we gave each one of those groups. So we have all 5 of our groups in here. And now in order to start adding in these different classes, the very first one, we'll just say group top. We want to add, or we want to select the class list, and then we want to add a class. And this is going to be our class of cracked. Essentially, we're saying we have this section and we want to show all of the cracks by using this cracked class. Now, before I go through filling out all of the rest of these if else, let's just make sure that this single one works for our group top. So if we save this, go over to our style sheet, we want to select our group top, and we want to select it when it has the cracked class. We want all of our elements that are crack elements to change their display from display none to display block, essentially just making them show up. Now when we click 3 times, we should see these top level cracks showing up, which is exactly what we want. Now let's do the same thing with all of the rest of our sections. So let's do this here. We're going to have our group top right. We want to do class list.add cracked. Let's just actually just copy that. It'll be a little bit easier. Then we're going to have our group bottom right, same thing. And here we're going to have our group, which is our left group. I think that's the last one left. Now if we save that and click this a bunch of times, we got our cracks on the top. And of course, we need to make sure we add our styles for all the other groups. So we're going to do group top right. We're going to do our group bottom right, our group left, and we'll even do the group cuff, even though there are actually no styles on that for the crack. And let's just copy this cracked section down for all of these. So whenever any of these have the cracked class, we want to show all of the different cracks. So now if I click this 3 more times, you should see we now have this showing up on the top right. 3 more times and we're getting here the bottom right. And 3 more times and it's showing up for the left ones. But since the left cracks are behind these other cracks, you don't notice any noticeable difference. But when this explodes, it'll actually make a difference. And speaking of exploding, when we get to these 12 clicks, this is when we actually want to explode our like button. So we can just add a class to our like button, say class list.add. We're just going to add a class of exploded to denote that our like button is exploded. And then we want to make all of these different pieces spin out of control when we get to that point. So let's save that, go into our style sheets. And in order to do that, we want to select exploded. We want to get our group top, for example. And in here, we want to have some form of animation that makes this fly off to the top of our screen. Now, the easiest way to do that is going to be by using the transform property along with translate, which will allow us to move our position. And then we're also going to, on top of that, use rotate in order to make this rotate all over the place. And right now, let's just put in here a rotation of 500 degrees, so it's going to spin quite a bit. And we're going to translate this slightly to the left and slightly up. So we're just going to use negative 15 view width. So it's going to do 15% of the width of our screen to the left. And we're also going to do negative 40 VH. So it's going to move up negative 40% of our view height. And if we save that, and we just click this a bunch of times, you can see that this has popped off. So in order to figure out exactly where this flew to and why we can't see it, and also in order to make our explosion animated instead of just popping from one place here to another place, let's actually come in and set up a transition, just like we have here for our like button, on our actual groups. So we want to select all of our different groups. So we're going to do group top. We're going to have group top right. We're going to have a group bottom right, our group on the left, and we're also going to have our group, which is going to be our cuff. And for each one of these, we want to have a transition. And this transition is going to be just for the transform property again. And we're going to want this to be 1 second, so it's a little bit longer. And if we save this now, you can see that this piece has a really weird spin. You can see that wherever it's rotating around, if I save it again, it's rotating around a really weird spot. So in order to make it rotate around the center of its own position, we can change the transform origin to center. And now when we save, you can see it's now spinning around its own center, which has it showing up on our screen right where we want it. And let's just refresh. So we start off with a fresh button, do all of the clicks and make sure everything works out. And as you can see, it's spun up exactly to where we want it to be. Let's just refresh it all back to normal and work on exploding out all of the rest of our pieces. I'm just going to copy this. And we're going to first work on our top right next. So for our top right piece, we're going to want to make it move up to this top right hand corner. So to do that, we're going to want to make it move 40% of the screen to the right. And we're also going to want to make it move 30% of the screen upwards. And let's just change this rotation to maybe 100. Now if I save, click this a bunch of times, we should see this piece here fly up to the top right. And as you can see, it flew up to the top right with a lot less spin as compared to this piece because we have this lower rotation. Also, let's make sure we have semicolons at the end here. Let's move this down. We're going to do next our bottom right. And for our bottom right, it's going to be very similar to our top right, but we actually want to move it down and to the right. So this 40 view width is going to be perfectly fine, but instead we're just going to move it down 30 view height, and we're going to change our rotation here to 200 degrees. As you can see, it's made it go down to the bottom hand of our screen, to the bottom right, just like that, which looks pretty good. All that we have left are these left-hand sections. So let's copy this down. We're going to do our group on the left next. And for our group left, what we're going to want to do is move it mostly to the left, but we'll also give it a little bit of vertical movement. So we'll do negative 40 on the view width, and we'll change this to be negative 15 view height. And let's give it a pretty wild rotation of 400 degrees. As you can see, it spins kind of wildly up into this left-hand corner that's slightly upward. Now for our cuff, in order to make it so it doesn't overlap this too much, we're going to move this down to the bottom left. So let's change this to be cuff. And again, we'll just keep this -40 here. We'll just change this to +15, and we'll mess with the rotation. We'll just do 300. That's the only degrees we haven't used yet. And now when we save, you can see that this moves down to this section over here. And if we refresh our page and click this a bunch of times, you're going to see our cracks are showing up just like we want. And as soon as we're done clicking, all of the pieces explode all over. But you'll notice a couple problems. First, our cursor still has the pointer cursor. And secondly, when we click, you can see the entire thing still scales. We obviously don't want that scaling to happen anymore, and we want this cursor to disappear. Luckily, we can fix both of those in CSS. We can say that when we have our like button, and we have it exploded, we just want to change our cursor back to normal. So we'll say cursor of initial. This is just going to reset our cursor back to default. And now as you can see, our cursor over here is back to default. All we have left is to remove that scaling effect. So what we can do here is we can say also when our like button is big, but also when it is not dot exploded. So we're saying when it's big, but not exploded. So essentially we're just ignoring this whenever our like button is exploded. Now if we save, we can click all we want. That big class is being applied, but it's not actually exploding our like button. We could also do this in the JavaScript by having an if check here and only adding big if it's not exploded. But I figured that doing it in the CSS is just as easy, so there's really no reason not to. And that's all it takes to smash the like button. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out my other videos linked over here, and maybe smash the like button down below as well. Also, when you're down there, you can click the subscribe button for more videos just like this one. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.